I recently picked up a copy of the AICPA's Analytical Procedures Audit Guide. It was just released in March of 2012 and updated, and it's an excellent book. It walks through a lot of examples of analytical procedures and how it relates to a financial statement audit, which, is not always the type of audits we do. However, analytical procedures, as they define it, is listed on the slide here. It's evaluations of financial information through analysis and plausible relationships among both financial and non-financial data. So you want to be looking at operational type data, external data, as well as your financial data. And then it is also encompasses such investigation after you've set this expectation of identified fluctuations or relationships that are inconsistent with other relevant information or that differ from the expected values by a significant amount. So I wanted to start off with this slide and say that not all the time are we looking at financial balances such as an accounts receivable or inventory and trying to estimate. But I also find that a lot of what we are doing, be it looking at a accounts payable process or a general ledger process, it does tie back in a lot of ways to looking at financial information. So I thought that this approach and taking a look at analytical procedures as a get-go starting point was a good idea. And I think one of the first things that everyone forgets to do is to form that expectation up front. A lot of people just start taking data, bouncing it against last year, and just start to say, well, what's the difference? And let's talk about the difference between this year and last year. And I find with analytical procedures, while we'll be doing that a lot with, say, the Benford law type work that we're doing or other type of statistical analysis we do today, the expectation formation of sitting down and really thinking about how should the data look and then building an expectation is a much better way of approaching it. So expectation formation should be the most intensive part of the procedure where you're really thinking about internal and external information and building to that. And then once you've done that, identify the differences. Normally people jump over expectation formation, go right to identification. And once you've identified those differences, then you can investigate the reasons for the difference and form a final evaluation of that difference. Here are the four types of analytical tests that come out of the audit guide. Now, trend analysis is when you're taking a look at, say, last year to this year, or possibly a weighted average over a number of years to this year, maybe taking a look at external data or budget data. And how we're going to fit this in is talking more about how Benford's law can be a bit of a external data point that you can utilize in tracking to your digital analysis, to your own digits, but also taking a look at the trend of your own data. So something doesn't have to fit to Benford's law. It could just be within your own data that you're taking a look at this year to last year or over various time frames. So trend analysis can be very effective, and ratio analysis, another one, is where we're going to talk about the relative size factor, where we're going to take a vendor or an enterer of information and say what is the largest item they've posted and what's the next largest item that they've posted. Reasonableness tests are where you're kind of coming up with your own calculation of what you think a balance should be. This may or may not really be applicable to what we're going to be talking about today because we're not so much calculating a balance, but I guess you could argue through some of the trending and taking a look at previous year Benford law or digital analysis that you have, you could kind of come up with what you expect your digit analysis to be this particular time frame and say that that's going to be my expectation and see how the data relates to it. And finally, regression analysis is probably a little bit beyond what we're doing here today, but we are hitting on most of these, and again, regression being the most difficult one to implement, but yet it is not that far off from what we're talking about today. What it boils down to is how precise can you get your expectation? And this is going to depend on these factors here, and I wanted to talk about how we're going to play in these factors. It could be we're explicit or implicit. Explicit is where we're explicitly going after a balance and saying we're going to calculate receivable balances, and we're not so much doing that here today. So it's a lot more implicit what we're doing, and hence the precision is a little bit less. From a number of predictors point of view, we are going to be scoring a variety of the Benford law and other type of digit analysis. So you actually could have 5 or 6 predictors, and hence we have a lot of predictors. We are going to be using operational data, and actually we're going to be using it at a very detailed level by getting transactional data. So it is very powerful on that end. And we are getting some external data as well because we're using Benford's law to backtrack into what we're calculating and using it as a bit of a guide. So we are using the external, and then that kind of brings us down to measuring the statistical precision, and that's the statistical value of the test that we're actually performing. So again, regression would be a wonderful test. What we're going to be doing though is building a bit of a scoring model. And because of that, I think, and because we're putting all these factors together and building the scoring model, I do think that statistically this is a lot more precise than just going out there and doing a this year to last year type of an analysis of your data. We are going to be calculating a score for every value, and then we're going to be summarizing that score in a variety of ways. So statistically speaking, we are going to be beating up this data about as hard as we can on the digital analysis.